Hello, and welcome to the last in a four-part series of podcasts covering Standard and Benchmark 3.1, Cycles of Matter and Energy. In this podcast, we're going to be delving into nutrient cycles, specifically the carbon cycle, phosphorus cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. For Kalani High School, this is the Allaire Report, and I'm your host, Mr. Allaire. In the last podcast, we talked a little bit about how energy and matter are transformed and transferred from organism to organism. The energy that living organisms need to do all the things that they do comes from food. Food contains energy and has important chemicals that help to sustain all of the living organisms throughout the world. The chemical substances that organisms like human beings require to live are called nutrients. Nutrients are needed by living things to help them carry out all of the things that make them alive. Think back to those characteristics of living things, like maintaining a stable internal environment, reproduction, the production or the repairing of cells. These all require nutrients. Now in this podcast, we're going to be focusing again on three nutrient cycles: the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. And as we'll see, all three of these nutrient cycles are vital to the health of living organisms. Now in class, we've already talked a little bit about carbon, so we're going to start with the carbon cycle. Carbon is a key ingredient to all living things. We've already discussed how it can be used to make diverse and complicated macromolecules. So we already have an understanding about how important carbon is to plants and animals all over the world. Now, even though carbon is an element, it's a little bit like water. Carbon cycles between various parts of the biosphere. And there are four different processes involved with the carbon cycle that we're going to go over together. These four processes are biological processes, geochemical processes, what are referred to as mixed biogeochemical processes, and last but not least, human activity. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. Again, these four different processes are biological processes, geochemical processes, mixed biogeochemical processes, and human activity. There are three major biological processes that are involved with the element carbon. Those processes are photosynthesis, respiration, and decomposition of plants and animals. Now we'll be talking about these more a little bit later in the next standard. In geochemical processes, you're focusing on the release of carbon dioxide gas to the atmosphere by volcanoes. This has become a major issue on the Big Island right now. In mixed biogeochemical processes, we have the deposition of carbon-rich remains from organisms and their conversion into fossil fuels like oil. And last but not least, with human activity, we have mining, burning fossil fuels, and the cutting and burning of forests. Once again, these are the four processes by which carbon moves around in our world. And if we take a look at this diagram, we can kind of get an idea of how complicated the carbon cycle is and how things move around. Again, we've got the decomposition of animals, we've got photosynthesis, we've got the deposition of minerals into the earth, and the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere via volcanoes. So there's a lot going on within this cycle. To understand this process a little bit better, we'll be taking a look at this diagram in class. Now, while we've spent quite a bit of time talking about carbon, one of the many elements we haven't talked much about is nitrogen. Nitrogen is an element that is used to create amino acids, and amino acids, in turn, are used to build proteins. Proteins, remember, are one of the organic compounds that we've talked about in class. Now, nitrogen is a naturally occurring element and occurs most frequently in the atmosphere. In fact, most of the air that we breathe is made up of nitrogen gas, 78% in fact. Nitrogen is also commonly found in ammonia, nitrates, and nitrites, and they're found in wastes produced by organisms and decaying matter. You might recognize the smell of ammonia from a household cleaner that your parents have at home for cleaning things like the toilet or cleaning the kitchen. It's a very strong, powerful smell. While a lot of the nitrogen that's in the ground comes from natural sources, it can also be added artificially, for instance, through fertilizers. Now, while nitrogen is very common, there are only certain types of bacteria that can use nitrogen directly. Even when we breathe in, 78% of the atmosphere we breathe is nitrogen, but our body doesn't use it. The bacteria that do use nitrogen convert nitrogen gas into ammonia. Remember that thick, nasty smelling stuff that's in your kitchen or your bathroom. And they do this through a process called nitrogen fixation. Now, while some bacteria convert nitrogen into ammonia, there are other types of bacteria that will convert ammonia into nitrates and nitrites. Some bacteria even convert these nitrates back into nitrogen gas in a process called denitrification. Now, once this nitrogen is available, producers can use it to make proteins. And as soon as the producers make proteins, the consumers can then eat the producers and reuse the nitrogen to make their own proteins. Think about it this way. Farmers use fertilizer on things like grass, so it has nitrates in it. Cows end up eating the grass, and they use the nitrates to start producing proteins. We eat the cows, so then we take those proteins and use them to make new proteins. When we get rid of waste, that waste can be used then to fertilize new grass, and the whole process starts all over again. That's why these are referred to as cycles. The matter is moved around and transformed and can be used over and over again. Now, the last of our 3 nutrient cycles is called the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus, while not a very common element, is absolutely essential to the formation of DNA and RNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid and is what is used to carry on genetic information. Now, phosphorus is not very common in the biosphere and in fact usually remains in rocks and soil minerals and ocean sediments. Now, as these things get broken down through erosion, the phosphates are released into the ocean and into the soil. When plants absorb phosphates from the soil, they can use it to create organic compounds, again specifically like nucleic acids. These organic phosphates then move through the food web. The producers use them to create their DNA. The consumers then eat the producers and carry on the process over and over again. If you take a look at this very simple diagram, you can see that the phosphorus is moving from the ocean and the land into the food web via the producers and then to the consumers. What you have to remember is that the matter is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transformed to be used at each individual step by a different organism. Well, that finishes it up for the 4th installment of our podcast for 3.1. So what I'd like you to do is to stop, go back, and watch and listen to both this section and Part C all over again. And I'd like you to write down any questions that you have and bring them to class for discussion. Remember, the whole point of this project is to get the basics online. Therefore, we can use the class to delve into things a little bit deeper. We can get really to the essential parts that people are having difficulty with and having trouble understanding. Of course, you may feel like you understand everything for Standard and Benchmark 3.1. So you're going to get a chance to show your stuff, because we're going to have a test on 3.1 this coming Monday, August 18th. And it's going to cover everything in parts A, B, C, and D. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in class, or of course, you can email me. I'll see you guys next time on the Allaire Report.